I listened to Jupiter, and it heart pulses. Thump, thump. The world didn't end with a bang or a scream. It started with a whisper from a telescope. Yesterday, at exactly 2:14 p.m., every major observatory on Earth turned its gaze toward Jupiter. For centuries, the Great Red Spot, that massive, swirling storm, has been a constant. It was just a feature of the sky. But suddenly, it changed. In the span of 6 hours, the storm didn't just grow, it turned deep, bruised purple. Then, it stopped spinning. For the first time in recorded history, the eye of the solar system was looking back. Elias sat in a room that smelled of stale coffee and humming electricity. He was a junior data analyst at a deep space station. Elias wasn't a hero. He was a man who liked patterns. He was someone who felt more comfortable talking to frequencies than to people. He had a nervous habit of tapping his wedding ring against his desk, click, 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 whenever the data didn't make sense. His goal was simple: monitor the radio emissions from Jupiter. It was usually just white noise, a low hum that sounded like a distant ocean. But the hum vanished. Elias leaned forward. His headset felt heavy. He checked his cables, thinking it was a hardware glitch. But the equipment was perfect. The silence coming from Jupiter wasn't empty, it was heavy. It felt like the silence in a room right before someone starts screaming. Then, he saw the first spike on his monitor. It was a lonely place. It was tucked away in the desert, surrounded by sand and heat. Inside, the air conditioning was always set too low, making the air feel sharp and artificial. The walls were lined with monitors displaying green lines and complex grids. Elias looked at the main screen. The latest image of Jupiter was being rendered. The planet looked like a marble of gas and ice. But the red spot, that legendary storm 3 times the size of Earth, looked different. It was no longer a swirl of clouds. It had become a perfect, dark circle. It looked like a pupil. "It's not a storm anymore," Elias whispered to the empty room. Then, the lights in the hallway flickered. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He felt small. The rules of the universe, the ones he had studied for years, felt like they were being rewritten by a hand he couldn't see. Elias needed to report this to his supervisor, Sarah. But he hesitated. If he reported a change in the storm, they would call it a weather event. If he told them what he actually felt, that the planet was aware, they would send him home for a mental health break. He was torn. His internal fear of being wrong fought against his external duty to the truth. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely type. He pulled up the audio files from the last hour. He wanted to find a rational explanation. He hit play. At first, there was nothing. Just the static of the desert wind hitting the satellite dishes outside. But a sound emerged. It was a rhythmic thumping. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. Elias froze. He knew that sound. He had heard it when his wife was pregnant with their daughter. It was a heartbeat. A heartbeat coming from a planet 500 million miles away. Then, the thumping grew louder. Elias didn't just feel scared, his body reacted for him. His skin turned pale, and a cold sweat broke out across his forehead. He gripped the edge of his desk until his knuckles turned white. He tried to swallow, but his throat felt like it was full of sand. He didn't need to be told that something was wrong. Every instinct in his DNA was screaming at him. The heartbeat wasn't fast. It was slow. Confident. He looked back at the monitor. The purple circle on Jupiter seemed to pulse in time with the audio. Then, the monitors flickered. The lights in the desert facility dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again. Elias reached for the phone to call Sarah. But the phone started ringing before he could touch it. Elias picked up the receiver. He expected Sarah's voice, sharp and professional. But instead, he heard his own voice. "Don't look away, Elias," his own voice said from the other end of the line. It sounded like him, but older. More tired. "If you look away, it happens faster." "Who is this?" Elias gasped. His heart was racing now. "I'm the version of you that didn't watch the screen," the voice replied. "The red spot isn't a storm. It never was. It's a seal. A lock on a door. And yesterday, the key turned." Then, the data on the screen shifted. The heartbeat audio grew louder, vibrating the floor. The eye on Jupiter wasn't just a circle anymore. It was expanding. It was eating the stripes of the planet. Elias realized with horror that the planet wasn't just looking. It was waking up. Then, the gravity in the room began to fail. Pens began to float off the desks. The coffee in his mug rose in a brown sphere, hovering in the air. Elias looked out the window of the facility. The desert sky was usually pitch black at night. But he saw something impossible. The stars were moving. They weren't drifting, they were being pulled. It looked like a giant drain had opened in the center of the solar system. Every point of light in the sky was being sucked toward Jupiter. "What if we aren't the observers?" Elias whispered. "What if we're the fuel?" Then, he realized that the great red spot had been a protective barrier. It wasn't keeping something in Jupiter, it was keeping the rest of the universe out. Now that the seal was broken, the echoes were coming back. The walls of the facility began to thin. Elias could see through them. He saw a city that wasn't there, a city made of shadows and glass. Then, he saw people walking through the Mojave sand, but they were dressed in clothes from 100 years in the future. Time was folding. The voice on the phone spoke again. "You have 10 seconds, Elias. You can either shut down the satellites and let the world die in darkness, or you can boost the signal and see what's on the other side. But if you see it, you can never come back." Elias thought of his wife. He thought of his daughter sleeping in their home 3 miles away. If he did nothing, they would vanish into the shadow city. Then, he looked at the master override switch. His flaw had always been his curiosity. He was the man who liked patterns. He needed to know the ending of the story. He reached for the switch. His fingers brushed against the cold metal. But he saw a shadow move in the corner of the room. It was a tall, thin figure with no face. It was a shadow of himself, reaching for the same switch. "We've done this before," the shadow seemed to whisper. Then, Elias made his choice. Elias slammed the switch upward. A beam of pure white light shot out from the satellite dishes, straight into the heart of the night. It hit the atmosphere and bounced toward Jupiter. The heartbeat sound reached a deafening roar. Thump. Thump. The world turned white. For a moment, Elias saw everything. He saw the birth of the sun. He saw the end of the earth. Then, he saw the great red spot open like a mouth. He realized it wasn't a storm or a lock. It was a mirror. Jupiter wasn't a planet. It was a reflection of Earth's future. We were looking at our own grave, millions of miles away. When Sarah walked into the facility the next morning, the air conditioning was still humming. The coffee was cold on the desk. But Elias was gone. She looked at the monitors. Jupiter looked normal. The great red spot was a swirling red storm, just like it had been for centuries. The world moved on. But Sarah noticed something. On Elias's desk, his wedding ring was still there. Beside it, scratched into the metal, were 4 words. The eye blinked back. Sarah looked up at the ceiling. She felt a strange sensation, like someone was watching her. She picked up the headset and put it on. She expected static. But she heard a faint, rhythmic sound. Click, click, click. It was the sound of a wedding ring tapping against a desk. Then, she realized the sound wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from the stars.